Hey, welcome everyone. So this video with Dr. Anthony Chaffee is an awesome video that he did for a meetup group for me. I was privileged to have him hop on a live Zoom from Australia to us here in Northern California. This was on a live Zoom, so the audio at the very end with the questions and answers is a little off because I wasn't prepared with a mic, but the rest of it with Dr. Anthony Chaffee is, the sound's great, but you don't want to miss some of the questions at the end because there was some really amazing content there. It is a little long, but he literally covers like everything you could imagine that has to do with all the misinformation that's out there with our health and diet and how the carnivore diet is going to help you. So definitely tune in, take the time to listen to this. If you've got to come back later and finish it up, that's fine. I think it's almost a couple of hours. I'm not going to do a whole lot of editing in here, so it's pretty raw. But if you haven't heard Dr. Anthony Chaffee, he's got a podcast, YouTube channel. You know, he's on Instagram, all of the social media there, and he is one of the top contributors to information about the carnivore diet. He himself, as a practicing doctor, has been following the carnivore diet for a very long time. I don't remember how long it is, but many years. More than a decade, I think. And so he is extremely credible and has a lot of really awesome information. So hope you enjoy this. Let's jump right into the video now.
So whatever you're biologically designed to eat, whatever you've been eating for millions of years, that's obviously what your biology is set up for, your biochemistry is set up for. So adding in things that have never existed in our diet, really, some of these things, 50 years. I mean, some things that have been made up last year, is Impossible Burgers, all these sorts of things. These are just completely, made up. These are ingredients that have just never been put in our body. There's just like a chemistry experiment. So these things are not designed to be in our body, but even plants are not designed to be in our body. And why does that matter? Well, it matters because plants are living organisms and they like to stay living organisms. And if you eat them, they can die, right? Or if you're eating their seed or their nut, that's a baby that is not going to make it. So they protect themselves. They certainly protect their babies, and they use different means and defenses. But one of the main defenses is actually by being poisonous and using chemical deterrents. They make about 1 million different chemicals, and the vast majority of them are a defensive in nature, right? Because they're stationary. They can't move. They can't run away. They can't fight back like an animal can. And so they need to use all sorts of different things. They need to be woody, barky. Trees grow up and tall and away from animals that are, stuck on the ground. And they also have thorns and spikes. They make latex, and we make latex gloves out of these things. But that's actually a defense mechanism for the plant because it's very tacky sap. And so an animal starts eating that leaf, that latex starts coming out, it actually glues their mouth shut. And they can't eat anymore. They physically are stopped from eating them. So it's a very elegant defense to stop an animal from eating you if you glue their mouth shut, right? The problem for the animal is that they then die because they can't get their mouth open. They can't eat after that, and that's it for them. So they're happy to kill you if you mess with them. They're more than happy to kill you. It is kill or be killed in the wild for plants as well as animals. And we know this inherently, right? Because if you get lost in the woods and you run out of food, you can't just eat any random plant, right? Most of them will make you very, very sick or even kill you. And, this is also why we have grocery stores. You're not just picking leaves off those bushes or the trees behind you and making a salad, because why the hell would you? You'd get very sick. You can't do that. So we know that inherently. And yet at the same time, we go and we buy, spinach and kale and all these other things and forget that applies to them as well. So it's not that kale and spinach are not poisonous. Spinach and kale will kill a koala. And they actually tried to give kale to cows, but it actually made them very sick, and it actually damaged the milk and things like that. And so they couldn't do that. Cows couldn't handle that. And that's because they are designed to eat certain things. Actually, ruminant animals are pretty robust. They can deal with a lot of different things because of the nature of their very complex digestive system. But even they will get very sick or even die from most plants. And so even herbivores that exclusively eat plants, they eat very specific plants. There's 340,000 plants in the world. Koalas eat one. Pandas eat one. Cows, horses, grazing animals, they eat grass. That's it. But they eat specific grasses. You can put sheep and cows on the same paddock. They eat different grasses, right? So they don't compete for resources, right? And then, the leaves that a deer eats are different from the leaves that a gorilla eats. Those are different from the leaves that a giraffe eats, and so on. You mix those leaves around, they all get sick or die. Okay. And a koala eats eucalyptus. Almost nothing else eats eucalyptus, maybe a few insects, right? But koalas can't eat anything else because they have the biological design to detoxify and somewhat safely eat eucalyptus, even though it does actually mess them up a bit. They don't have that design for anything else. They can't do that. So, something I learned in 7th grade was that plants and animals are in an evolutionary arms race. Plants becoming more and more poisonous, so less and less animals can eat them so they can survive and thrive. And that's why they haven't gone extinct. And so all the plants that have made it through the gauntlet of evolution, these things are battle hardened. They know how to survive. And that animals are becoming more and more adapted to specific poisons in specific plants so they can eat that plant and survive and thrive. And this is why you have koalas that just eat eucalyptus, pandas that just eat bamboo, and so on. So they have that biological design. They can eat that plant, but they can't eat other plants. So if your species hasn't evolved to eat a specific plant, that plant is bad for you to varying degrees. Now, we have an herbivorous background, but it was about 6 million years ago that our ancestors started eating more and more meat. We started getting more and more adaptations from other primates. And about 3.3 million years ago, we found the oldest example of worked stone tools, like sharpened edge stone tool that our ancestors were using to kill and dismember meat, because we didn't have big teeth, we didn't have big claws, right? So we had to figure out tools. We had to use pound stones to crack open the skulls of animals and get at the brain. That was early scavenging. We have evidence of that going back millions of years before the worked first sharpened stone tools, right? So we've been using tools for millions of years. We didn't have the physical characteristics like a lion did to just kill and dismember and eat animals. So we had to figure things out. We had to develop our brains. We had to develop tactics. We had to develop tools, which is why we got smarter and lions got toothier, right? And that's also why we live in houses and lions don't, because what we use our brains for to make tools to go hunting, and we made those tools for, we could apply that tool making and intelligence to other things, right? And so that was, I think, definitely a leg up. I'll take the houses over mane and claws, thank you very much. And so that's the direction that we went. But for about the last 3 million years or so, we've been nearly exclusively eating meat. And when the ice ages started, because there weren't any ice caps or ice or anything like that before about 2.5 million years ago, that's when the ice ages started happening. We're actually still in the middle of an ice age. That's why we still have ice caps. Those are not normally there. And as those ice sheets are coming down, you're killing all these plants and animals that survived on them. Who survived? Well, our ancestors that were already hunting, that were already eating meat, that were already able to survive on an only meat diet. And those are the ones that survived. And that's the ones that we came from. And other pre-human species actually died out around that time and went extinct. They were more reliant on plants and they couldn't make it. So during that time, people think like, well, the vegans will tell you that, as ice sheets were coming down, people started moving towards the equator, right? Because that's where the fruit and the honey and the bushes were, right? Well, that's actually wrong. The fossil record, I mean, a lot of people will just make things up. So always challenge people. If someone is saying something, you're like, okay, that doesn't sound right. I say, where's your evidence for that? Ask them to prove it. They generally will not be able to do it. Maybe there's like a blog or something like that somewhere, but there will never be any hard evidence of these sorts of things. So it's, people were moving towards the equator. No, they weren't. The fossil record is very clear. People were moved, as the ice sheets were coming down, people moved up into the ice, because that's presumably where the megafauna was that they wanted to hunt. And so during those ice ages, there were no plants available. There was no fruit. There was no honey. There was none of that available. What was available was meat. And this is when we became apex predators. We weren't just scavengers. We weren't just sort of getting what we could. We all of a sudden became able to take down a mastodon and eat the whole thing, right? And this is when our evolution really started taking off. We were much shorter. Brains were smaller, but the brains were growing and our height were growing for millions of years. But then at this point, it has exponential growth, and our brain had the fastest growth of any sort of species in the fossil record. And that came up and up and up and up and up and up, exponentially increasing until about 10,000 years ago, bang, sharp decline. And in fact, there's a line at the agricultural revolution 8,000 years ago or so. Right before that, when people were, the megafauna has died out about 15, 20,000 years ago with the last ice age, right? So we already our food supply has been disrupted. So we've been eating mastodons and giant sloths for millions of years, and now all of a sudden they're gone. You have certain places that had like buffalo and all that sort of stuff. They were still able to sort of do that, or the different areas with horses and all that stuff. But a lot of people sort of didn't have the right hunting food supply, so they started turning to hunter gatherers. Before that, it was just hunters. Now it's a bit hunter gathering. And then some of those hunter gatherers switched over to farming and agriculture. There's a line right there at agriculture, right before agriculture, even when people were not even eating a lot of megafauna, but hunting and gathering, they were still 5 inches taller, 11% larger brain capacity. They had better teeth. They had big jaws. They had perfectly straight teeth. They didn't get cavities. They didn't get crooked teeth. They had all of their four wisdom teeth would come in. And directly after agriculture, so this is not thousands of years down the road, this is directly after agriculture came in, people started eating a lot more plants. They were, again, 5 inches shorter, brains were smaller, brain capacity or brain size reduced by 11% directly after agriculture, and it stayed down. Our brain sizes are smaller now. They're smaller than they were before agriculture. We are dumber than we were before that. And this is 100% developmental. This is not genetic. We know that because there's a sharp line. And when you get away from that, people are taller. You start eating more meat. You have people in Asia or Europe or whatever, and they've had different famines with communism and so forth. They're short, stunted statures. And then they come to America, they come to other Western countries, they have more access to meat, and their kids are 6'4". Right? You have these tiny little 5'2" parents, and the kids are 6'4". Right? That happens regularly. And we know that the average height of a population denotes the average health of a population. The Mongols right now, they're like on average 5'4" for the an adult male. However, with Genghis Khan and the Mongol horde, they're on average 6'4". And that's because they were eating horse meat, drinking horse blood, and fermented mare's milk. They were massive. They were monsters, and they absolutely just ravaged most of Asia and most of Europe, the largest contiguous empire that's ever existed on Earth. And like all the different histories and accounts were that these were massive human beings, that the little peasant armies in Asia and China and things like that, they like actually couldn't hit them hard enough to penetrate their armor. Whereas like the Mongols were just cleaving these people in half. It was just crazy, the difference in physical stature and ability. That came from eating meat. We also know that before the megafauna died out, that these areas that people were hunting mastodons, just eating woolly mammoths, they were again on average 6'2", 6'4", as a range from about 5'10" to 6'4". So these are massive, massive people. That's, there is a genetic component, but it's largely to do with epigenetics and our diet, right? So the things that we're eating are affecting what we're doing. We know this from other studies with cats. You feed them slightly wrong thing, just cooked meat instead of raw meat, and they actually get worse generation after generation. After 3 generations, they can't reproduce. Their bone density is their bone mineralization is 3% instead of 14%. They're getting all these fractures. They're much smaller brains. Their cheekbones don't develop properly, and that's just from cooking meat instead of giving them raw meat, right? But then you start giving them raw meat, they don't just bounce back. They don't just, like, the next generation, they're back at the raw meat stage. It takes 4 generations to breed back into a normal cat, right? So there are epigenetic effects that have generational knock-on effects, okay? And so this is what we're in the middle of now. So how this matters to us today? Well, if we're going to be as healthy as we possibly can, if our kids are going to be as healthy as possibly as they can, and their kids and their kids and their kids, and we want to breed out to being these tall bastards. The Native Americans in the plains Indians who were eating buffalo, they were just eating meat, maybe had some berries seasonally. There's a recent studies showing this. They were the tallest human beings on Earth, right? There's a delegation from the Great Lakes that came down and visited then President Thomas Jefferson, right? He was a tall guy. He was like 6'2". And he said in his writings that these guys were giants, that they were huge. And from paintings and depictions and looking at scales, they figured these guys were nearly 7 feet tall, right? Just hunters. That's it. They were just eating meat and they were growing tall as hell. That is not the same now. You go to Indian reservations and these sorts of things, they're eating the crap that we're eating, and it's seriously affecting their health. Right. So again, if your species hasn't evolved to eat something that is bad for you, now you can have some sort of adaptations. And certain populations have had agriculture longer than others. And that would be European populations, certain Asian populations, Middle Eastern populations, Northern Africa. And other populations have been introduced to that subsequently since the colonial era, right? Like Native Americans, who were pushing 7 feet tall, and now they're, lower end on the 5 foot scale. Why is that, right? Because they don't have these genetic adaptations. They don't even have the slight genetic adaptations. And so this is something that I actually learned when I was a kid, that when eating a Western diet, Native Americans were 4 times as likely to get obesity, heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, cancer, and all the rest. And I remember thinking, I was like, well, doesn't that mean the food is causing the disease? Because if they don't eat the food, they don't get the disease. And we eat the food and we get the disease, we just get it at a lower rate. And what's a non-Western diet? What are they eating that we're not, and vice versa? Well, they didn't tell me at the time, but the answer was they're pure high-fat carnivores. They weren't eating these plants with all these plant toxins. Now, some people say, well, no, they were specially adapted, like the Inuit, just eating blubber and whale and polar bear and fish and things like that. And so I was like, why doesn't that cause heart disease? Why are these people not getting cancer and diabetes and all these things that you say are caused by eating fatty meat? Well, they're specially adapted. No, they're not. We're specially adapted. We started eating something new. We've always eaten meat. The majority of humanity lived exactly as the Inuit are living traditionally. During an ice age, just eating meat, nothing else available. That was the original form. Eating plants, that came subsequently. So that's new. That's the change, right? And so we're specially adapted to eat some of these poison ass plants, right? So they're not, but they have much lower rates of heart disease. Before they started getting ingrained in the in Western culture and drinking alcohol, smoking cigarettes, and eating a bunch of garbage, their heart disease rate was 0. Their cancer rates were 0. Their diabetes rates were 0. Then they started coming up, and there's actually studies with this going, every couple decades they're doing more, and it's just like cancer rates coming up a bit, heart disease coming up a bit. And they also, but it's still lower than the rest of Canada, even including ones that are in cities eating crap, right? So there's a range. You have these people eating Western food and they're getting sick. So it's not a population thing, it's a diet thing. The ones that are eating like they were supposed to eat, they're the ones not getting these diseases. And they on average start smoking when they're 8 years old, which is pretty crazy. So there was a study in 1992 up in Canada where they looked at this, and they said, well, these guys have crazy risk factors for heart disease. They're just eating blubber. They're smoking since they're 8. And they have the lowest rates of heart disease. They have much lower rates of heart disease on average than the rest of Canada, right? So he said, okay, they must be they must be specially adapted against heart disease theory was disproven it with this study in 1992. And so they looked at all these genetic markers for heart disease. And so you have certain genes that make you more likely to get heart disease or less likely to get heart disease. They said, okay, well, we predict that they'll have all these good ones protecting against heart disease. No, they had all the bad ones, all of them. They were completely at risk genetically of getting heart disease, and yet they were not getting heart disease. So what does that mean? You have a genetic predisposition, you have environmental triggers. So they had the genetic predisposition, but they were not getting the environmental trigger unless they were eating the crap that we were eating. Heart disease, the first person to die of a heart attack that was shown on autopsy in America was around 1910. And people didn't believe it. They were like, that's bullshit. It's just like, no, there was this blockage in the coronary artery and the muscle died. And that's what I think killed this guy. And they're like, we've never heard of that. We've been doing autopsies on people for hundreds of years. No one has ever described that. And you make your name by describing a new pathology. That's how you go down in the history books. So many things are named after doctors, in previous centuries that have discovered, various things. And so they're like, no, we don't buy it. It wasn't until another decade later that they started going like, oh, okay, maybe that guy was onto something, because more and more people seem to be dying from this weird thing that was affecting the heart. A decade after that, in the 1930s, heart disease is the #1 killer in America. 20 years earlier, it had never been heard of, had never been seen. Now it's the #1 killer in America, right? What was happening at that time? We were actually eating less meat in the 20s and 30s than we had for 200 years. So all the 1800s and 1900s, the 19th to 20th century, we're eating much more meat, sort of troughed down. We're eating a lot more meat at the beginning of the 1800s. And that slowly started sort of coming down. Around 1920, 1930 was a trough, and then it started coming up a bit after that. And now it's, sort of up on the V as well. No heart disease at all. No one had a heart attack, no heart disease at all in the whole 1800s and early 1900s. And all of a sudden it's the #1 killer at that trough, while we were eating the least amount of meat in 200 years. That's when this bang spikes up. But that's when we started making processed foods. That's when Kellogg's came on the scene, Sanitarium Foods came on the scene. That's when processed seed oils, which were industrial lubricants, they started being sold to humans for consumption. That's when sugar started being able to be refined, and this started becoming major components of our caloric intake on a daily basis. And you see those perfectly track with heart disease. Seed oils and sugar perfectly track with heart disease. Saturated fat and animal fats actually come down. It's actually reciprocal. Saturated fat total, because there's other sources of saturated fats, sort of brought it up. It's basically a flat line for a century for saturated fat. And that's actually been shown by the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, that saturated fat is not connected with heart disease at all. So there's no upper limit on the amount of saturated fat you can eat, as per the #1 cardiology journal on earth, right? And in fact, they found an inverse relationship between saturated fat consumption and stroke rate. So people that are eating more saturated fat are actually protected from getting a stroke. People eating less saturated fat are at higher risk of getting a stroke, right? So it's exactly the opposite of what they told us, exactly the opposite of what they told me in medical school about, the Framingham study and other sort of, big studies looking at heart disease. And they found, wow, with increased LDL cholesterol or total cholesterol, people are having more heart attacks and strokes. In fact, those same studies actually showed the exact opposite. The Framingham study showed that the less cholesterol you have, the higher your stroke and heart attack rate. The AHA, the American Heart Association, lied and misrepresented that 2 years later, because they were bought and paid for by the sugar companies. And we actually know this too. The Journal of the American Medical Association, one of the top medical journals in the world, published in 2016 actual internal memos from the sugar companies detailing how they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies to make it appear as if cholesterol caused heart disease when it was really sugar. And then to exonerate sugar, say that it was safe, say it was an empty calorie. And since you can't eat fat, we've always been eating fat, but probably not good for you, so you should just replace it with sugar, because it's an empty calorie, it'll be safe, and you at least get away from this potential harm. And that was bought and paid for. And so people like Ansel Keys was one of these people, who was a very famous scientist, but completely corrupt and completely, in the pay of the sugar company. So one of those professors from Harvard was named head of the USDA. And he was the one who authored and published the 1977 USDA declaration saying that cholesterol caused heart disease and saturated fat increases cholesterol. Stop eating both. And it changed the world. And we've reduced our red meat consumption by over 33%, obviously, because that's worse. We reduced eggs as well, and reduce our cholesterol and saturated fat consumption by 33%. Reduce red meat by over 33%, increased chicken, but sort of lean chicken breasts and things like that. So the meat consumption was somewhat stable, but fat, cholesterol, red meat all came down. Fruits and vegetables went up by 30-40% respectively. Grains went up, sugar went up. So, well, they actually got replaced with high fructose corn syrup, over tripled the amount of high fructose corn syrup we were eating, over tripled the amount of seed oils that we were eating. And what happened? Well, heart disease rates tripled, for one. And so, but also stroke rate, obesity rate, cancer rates have all increased massively. Diabetes has increased massively. Autoimmune diseases have increased massively. Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autism, all of these things have increased exponentially. They almost didn't exist before the 1980s. Now they're one of the mainstays in modern medicine. 90% of the illnesses that we treat as doctors are these so-called chronic diseases that are non-communicable chronic diseases that you just get for some damn reason, and you can't pass them on. You're not catching them from anyone else. We don't know why they come on. We don't know why they go away, but we can only treat their symptoms because we don't know the cause. Well, you can ask a zookeeper what the cause is, because you say, what do you feed animals? Oh, you have to feed them what they eat in the wild. That's why they have those signs that say, do not feed the animals. It makes them very sick. Don't feed the animal the thing that you're eating right now. It makes them sick. What the hell is it doing to you? Right? And you ask them, you say, okay, would you ever feed them like kibble and dog food and this, that, and the other? Like, oh my God, are you out of your mind? They'll get human diseases if you do that. What the hell is that? So all of a sudden, just eating dog food and kibble and grain, they'll catch diabetes from someone? No, it causes the diabetes. It causes the autoimmune issues. And that's what zoo animals get. You feed them something they don't eat in the wild, they get sick. But what do they get sick with? They get obesity, heart disease, liver disease, diabetes, cancer, autoimmune diseases, arthritis. Dogs and cats, known carnivores, and we give them this grain and plant-based kibble. They get the same things. We get the same thing because they are not diseases. These are toxic exposures. You're getting exposed to something toxic to you, something that your body's not biologically designed to handle, and it's breaking down. It's getting sick. We didn't know what the exact symptoms of lead poisoning were until basically the late 1800s. The Romans sort of figured it out. The Romans had lead pipes, and for a long time, everyone was getting sick. They didn't know what the hell was going on. You think there's just a plague or a sickness or a disease or a something. And they figured out, I think it's something to do with these pipes. People that drink water out of this, they're getting sick, and you take it away from them, and they don't get sick anymore. So we're living in our Roman era lead pipes. We are exposing ourselves to toxins that our bodies are not designed and adapted to deal with, some more or less than others. And we're getting sick. But the good thing about that is once you recognize that, it's real easy to get better, because all you do is just remove that exposure. So you have lead pipes in your house, all of a sudden you realize, oh shit, I've got lead poisoning. So what do? Do you take a bunch of medications that sort of just slowly chelate these things out and mitigate your lead poisoning for 40 years until you die young and painful, bleeding out of your eyes? Or do you get rid of the lead pipes, right? You get rid of the lead pipes and you just go back to normal. Right now, we're treating the symptoms of lead poisoning. And we're just going, oh, no, you don't need to worry about that. You don't need to change your diet. Eat whatever you want. Just take this pill, right? And I think that's a little more by design than maybe once thought. You know, I'm fairly cynical person, but I still try to give people the benefit of the doubt. And the pharmaceutical, because I'm a doctor, and I definitely use pharmaceuticals and things like that. And I think that a lot of people involved are very well-meaning, but the people at the top aren't necessarily. I spoke with someone, or I saw an interview rather, and they were with some executives at a pharmaceutical company, and they were just talking about things. And he was like, what my favorite drug is that we make? And they were like, oh, what? And they're thinking, something that, cures childhood leukemia and does all these sort of wonderful things in Africa or something like that. Said, no, my favorite drugs are the ones that cause side effects that we have other drugs to treat. Okay. So that's someone who's sick in the head, right? That's someone who's saying that I want you to suffer so that I can sell you something, and you have to buy something. You're beholden to me forever. And that's the chronic disease model, that you keep people sick. You don't cure them. You don't fix. Chris Rock said this in the 1990s. He said, doctors are still pissed off about polio. They don't want to cure anything, right? They just want to keep you sick and sell you the medicine for the rest of your life. And that is exactly what's going on. They've continually ratcheted down the acceptable range for blood pressure. So now more and more people have to go on blood pressure medications. More and more people have to go on statins. They're lowering the thresholds for people. And they're saying that everyone over 50, doesn't matter what your cholesterol is, everyone over 50 should be on a statin. 50% of people over 40 should be on a statin. Now they're saying, oh, you should actually start these things in your 30s. If you have kids that have high cholesterol, those children should be put on statins. Why the hell would you do that? Your body's made out of cholesterol. What a statin does is it stops your body from making cholesterol, making the large buoyant LDL cholesterol molecules that are good for you, not the damaged SDLDLs that come about from glycation, oxidation, from plants, from carbs, from sugar, from alcohol, from seed oils, right? So it stops your body from making the good ones, and it keeps the bad ones there, okay? It also stops your brain from making cholesterol. 20% of your brain is cholesterol. The myelin sheath, the axon, the insulation around your axons, most of that is cholesterol and saturated fat, right? And so you're stopping your brain from making this. Lipitor and others, not all of them, but a fair amount of them, cross the blood-brain barrier and stop your brain from making cholesterol, which it requires as an essential building block of your brain. And so people's brains are atrophying and it's causing Alzheimer's. So there was a study that actually showed that it can cause a reversible kind of autism. They had all these people that quote unquote had Alzheimer's, but they were on these statins that could cross into the brain. And so they took them off the statins. 6 weeks later, they didn't have Alzheimer's anymore. Put them back on the medications. 6 weeks later, they had Alzheimer's again, right? So you're causing brain damage. And now they're saying we should give this to kids with a developing nervous system. That is truly sick. And it gets worse than that, because I just found this out recently, but Kellogg's cereal, it was one of the first processed food companies. And this is something I think people should look into. There's a lady named Belinda Fettke, Fettke, and she does talks on YouTube about how do we get here with these nutritional guidelines and suggestions? Where did this all come from? Where did the nutritionists, who started the whole nutrition sciences at the university level? Who writes the curriculum? It actually comes back to a religious origin with Kellogg's, which is the Seventh-day Adventist Church, who in the 1800s had a vision from God. Their prophetess, Ellen G. White, had a vision from God, so she said, that meat was bad. It caused lustful feelings and sexual urges. Lust was a sin. Therefore, meat was a sin. And her, one of the people she looked up to was Sylvester Graham of the Graham Cracker. And this was something all throughout the 1800s that people thought that like you need to eat a bland plant-based diet to suppress your sexual urges. This was during Puritan, temperance movements and things like that. That just masturbation was just the worst sin on earth. She wrote a book. Ellen G. White wrote a book about how if your kid masturbates once, it's like putting a gun to his breast and pulling the trigger. His life is over in that instant. They really took this seriously, and so Kellogg's was her protege and her typesetter. So he's just getting indoctrinated with this stuff from an early age. And he grew up to be Dr. Kellogg. And he and his brother founded Kellogg's Cereals. And he was a very influential doctor and scientist. And he pushed all this sort of stuff. He's also the one who pushed male circumcision in America as well. That's why the majority of men in America are circumcised, is because he convinced the medical establishment this is actually good for boys' health. It's actually not. It's absolutely not. But it made it difficult to have sex and masturbate. That's why he did it. And he would punish kids. Basically, moms come in like, oh, he's just masturbating. So they take him to the doctor for some reason. And so he would take him and he would circumcise boys and girls without anesthetic. The guy was sick. And he would actually use like acids and different sort of caustic agents to actually score and burn little girls' private parts to stop them from getting pleasure out of masturbating. It was twisted. And he actually tried to push female circumcision, the removal of the clitoris in America as well. That one didn't take, thankfully, but male circumcisions did take. And so that's where that comes from. And so they started nutritional sciences. They founded, was it the American Nutritional and Dietetics Association in 1917 or something like that. They wrote the first textbook on nutrition in 1925. It's still the current edition is still being used in Ivy League nutrition courses, and they still write the curriculums. They're on the boards. They're making the guidelines. They're in the WHO. They're the ones who came up with that WHO 2015 proclamation that processed meats were a likely carcinogen, and that red meat were probably a carcinogen. They were Seventh-day Adventists, they were vegans, they were vegetarians, and they cherry-picked studies and omitted others. And the University of Washington in Seattle published last year saying that they looked at hundreds of studies and saying like, these are crap, these are lazy, this is lazy science, these are corrupt, these are biased, and there is no evidence to suggest that meat causes cancer or is even associated with cancer, and especially not unprocessed red meat. So why does this matter? Well, because we are getting sick, and we're getting sicker and sicker and sicker by the decade. And I think it is a direct relationship to what we're eating and what we're supposed to be eating. And the reason we're being, controlled and told to do certain things, religious in origin. Now there's massive multinational, multi-trillion dollar food companies that have a very specific driving financial agenda. All these different sorts of things, like, the exercise is medicine sort of things. Oh, you should exercise. Don't worry about what you're eating. You just need to exercise. That was founded by Coca-Cola. That's still funded by Coca-Cola. But what I was coming to that was worse than all that was that the food companies are heavily invested in the pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies are heavily invested in the food companies. So that's very suspicious that they sort of know the connection, that they know something is going on. And just like that, that executive saying that, oh, I like the medications that cause problems that you need other medications to fix. Well, wouldn't they love even more selling you food that's not really food, but makes you sick, and then you sell them things that help with that? Now you could say, well, maybe they're just a good investment. They both make a lot of money. And that's true. But why is it that Kellogg's, which is vertically integrated, they grow their own crops, they grow their own produce and products, and then they process them, put them in boxes, sell them around to people. They're also vertically integrated with pharmaceuticals. What pharmaceuticals do they make? They make diabetes medication, make blood sugar lowering medication. So they are selling you something that they know causes diabetes, that they know causes metabolic issues, and they are selling you the medicine for it. That's knowledge of forethought. I'd say that's pretty damning evidence. These people know exactly what they're doing. They know they are selling you something that makes you sick, and they are profiting off of that. And I think that those people honestly need to be shot, but at least need to be prosecuted criminally for that. And that's why I think this is so important. I have seen people reverse diseases that are heretofore thought to be irreversible. They just don't go away. They're chronic, like diabetes. 5 years ago, every doctor on earth would say diabetes is not possible to reverse. It's not possible. It's a chronic illness. It only gets worse. That's not true. You remove carbohydrates, you remove processed sugars and seed oils, it goes away very quickly. And this has been shown in large clinical trials in humans, not just animals. So this is clinically proven. And I see it day after day after day after day. You remove carbs, sugar, alcohol, seed oils, diabetes disappears. If you do even better if you get rid of all plants, because there are other sort of plant toxins and things like that. I have a whole lecture called "Plants Are Trying to Kill You," where I go through all the different sorts of a lot of different plant toxins. There's a million of them. A lot of different classes of them. Some are called lectins, which are absolutely toxic as hell. Some of these things actually bind to insulin receptors. And they bind to leptin, which is your satiety hormone, makes you overeat, triggers insulin, even if you don't have carbs in your system. And high insulin causes a lot of problems in your body, huge problems. And so I have a lot of lectures on that as well. But you get people off these things, and people even going on a vegetarian diet. Some of them will improve if they get away from processed foods. But processed foods are vegetarian. They're plant-based, right? It's just processed plants. So it's highly processed carbs and sugar and things like that, seed oils. And so they get away with that and they go to more whole foods. They will improve for a time. And then they'll start getting worse. They'll have a buildup of these toxins. They won't get proper nutrition because they're not getting the essential nutrients that you have to have from meat. There are things in meat that you have to have that you cannot get from plants or anywhere else. There is nothing in plants or fungus or anything like that you have to have that you cannot get from meat. And so if you're avoiding those things, you will get sick. Some people take supplements and they last longer, but either way, it's going to detract from their health, and it's not going to be. They're not going to be as healthy as they could possibly be. And so people going from a vegetarian diet, a vegan diet, they come to 84% of vegans and vegetarians start eating meat again and the most commonly given reason is because of health issues, because their health is suffering so much. They have to start eating meat just to get basic nutrition. They all feel so much better, and they'll have, or some people will help their autoimmune diseases. But I have people coming from vegetarian to vegans that, yes, it sort of helped it at first, but it didn't make it go away. And they're still suffering with this for years. And then they come off all plants and only go to meat, and it's gone. So it's not the meat that's the problem. It's, these other plant products that are highly processed, these industrial products that are even worse. Right. And so, and again, a lot of these studies are coming from the Seventh-day Adventist Church, but they're also coming from industry. Coca-Cola, just Coca-Cola, not even Nestle, Pepsi, Kellogg's, Sanitarium, all these other ones. Just Coca-Cola spends 11 times the amount of money on nutritional research than the NIH, right? So 95% plus of the nutritional literature that is available on this earth is coming from very suspicious sources, people that have agendas. You know, the DAA, the Dietetics Association of Australia, they say that a ketogenic diet is, oh, well, this is a fad diet. There's no real evidence. There are literally thousands of studies in humans and tens of thousands in animals showing that a ketogenic diet reverses massive amounts of chronic diseases, helps in cancer, reverses diabetes, reverses Crohn's disease, all these sorts. It puts these things in remission that are thought to could not have been put into remission. And that's just removing carbs, right? And so we're saying, no, that's a fad. But the vegan diet, vegan diet's very healthy. Vegan diet, oh yeah, a well-designed vegan diet is really good. But you do have to worry about these pesky things called nutrients like B12, D3, K2, vitamin A, retinol, iron, and all these other sorts of things. But if you account for that, that's okay. I was like, okay, you're a nutritionist and you're saying, and you're promoting a diet that is lacking in basic nutrients. Like, you're clearly an idiot or corrupt. And in fact, they're corrupt. So they only put out 4 studies to back up their claim that a vegan diet is good. Every single one is either by a Seventh-day Adventist or by an employee of Sanitarium Foods, which is owned by the Seventh-day Adventist church. It's still owned by them. They get tax exempt status. Walter Willett, the top nutritional researcher at Harvard, he's a Seventh-day Adventist, right? Pritikin, people know about him. There was a heart healthy Pritikin diet back in the 70s and things like that. He was an adjunct professor at Loma Linda University, which is the Seventh-day Adventist medical school and medical center. These guys are all wrapped up. They have their little grubby fingers everywhere in the world. There are 22 million people. Most of them are very nice people. I know several of them. And they all say, like, no, yeah, that's all true. From the top down, this stuff is really hammered through, and it's very, very corrupt. They're pushing this from a religious agenda and now a financial agenda as well. And so I think that it is probably one of the most, well, it's absurdly corrupt, but it's also one of the most important things that we're dealing with, because you're talking about billions of people. This affects everyone. You've had billions of people be damaged and had their lives truncated. We're designed genetically to live 120 years. I don't know if you guys know that, but genetically, according to our chromosomes, we should live 120 years on average, meaning that if you just stay out of your own way and just don't mess up, you should live to 120 years without doing anything special, without taking any medications, without going for a jog. You should make it to 120 just by being here. Why are we dying in our 60s and 70s? Why are we sick since our 30s? Why is it that after you get into your 30s and you just start crashing down? I'm 43 years old. I have more energy now than when I was 26. And I say 26 because when I was 25, I was only eating meat because I learned how toxic plants were in college. I took cancer biology and found out they had 136 known carcinogens just in Brussels sprouts, over 100 in mushrooms, over 60, 80, 90 in spinach, kale, lettuce, celery, cabbage, cucumber, broccoli, tomatoes, potatoes, everything that you've ever put in your mouth that grew out of the ground. Every single one of those things is trying to kill you. And that's what my professor of cancer biology said to us, because we were just blown away by this. And there's actually 10,000 times more naturally occurring pesticides in the plants that we eat than the pesticides we spray on them industrially. And that was proven out of a study from Professor Bruce Ames in UC Berkeley in 1989. And that the pesticides were not as toxic as the naturally occurring poison. So mushrooms were 500 times more likely to cause cancer than the pesticides that were being used on them, right? So if you're worried about pesticides, you should damn well be worried about the plants that they're being sprayed on. And we were very blown away by this. And he just looked at us and he said, listen, I don't eat salads and I don't eat vegetables. I don't let my kids eat vegetables. Plants are trying to kill you. So I was like, right, that's it. And that's why I named my talk Plants Are Trying to Kill You, because they are. Not that they have a vendetta against you and they just want to get you. They might, because you die and you fall down, they get to absorb you, right? You get your nutrients in their soil. Right? That's how plants live, is by getting our waste, our excretions, and our bodies as they decay and break down, right? It's a circle of life. for plants as well as animals. So I stopped eating plants when I was 20. I sort of started coming back to it when I was 25, playing professional rugby in England, just because I'm just, frankly, the meat sucks there. And like, I couldn't get anything that wasn't like slightly breaded or crumbed or something like that. And so I was just like, all right, well, dose makes the poison, maybe just a bit of crumbing on chicken 2 times a week. That was enough to take me off my game and not feel great. And all of a sudden I'm getting, injuries and just sort of sore and this and that. I wasn't playing. I was like, why don't I feel as superhuman amazing as I normally do? Am I not working out as hard? Am I not pushing myself? I'm 25 now. Is that just over the hump and I'm just dying now? That was the only thing I could figure out. I didn't know what the hell else was going on. Looking back now, that's when I started eating a little bit of things that come from plants. But that opened the door, because now I wasn't thinking, I will not touch anything that comes from a plant. I wasn't doing a carnivore diet. I wasn't thinking, hey, we're actually apex predators and I'm living how we're supposed to live biologically. That makes sense that I feel so good. I was just like, I'm not touching plants. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, well, maybe a little bit of plants isn't that bad. Well, maybe a little more isn't that bad. And then it was just, it was done from there. I feel better now at 43 than I did at 25, just coming off of a carnivore diet, right? And so you don't have to break down and get older and get sicker in your 30s, in your 40s, in your 50s, in your 60s. 60 is middle-aged, 80 is middle-aged, 90 is late middle-aged. If you die anywhere below 120, you died young. And so we have people dying 5 decades early, and we're calling that, oh, they had a good life. No, they damn well didn't. They were robbed of half a century, and that's half a century of life. And what were they like for the 5 decades leading up to their death? They were just getting slowly worse and slowly worse until they passed away. People say, oh, I don't want to live 120 years, because you're thinking about aging in the same way that people do now. You're thinking of someone who's in their 70s and they're crippled and frail, and you don't want to get even more crippled and frail and just be like just drooling in a chair for 40 years. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how the Native Americans and the Plains Indians were living at 110, 120 years old with a pack on their back following the buffalo herds, living an active, adult, healthy lives. This is chronicled in multiple histories, in multiple books. Dr. J.H. Salisbury was a New York doctor where the Salisbury steak was named after. He did a 30-year research project on the optimal diet for humans, and he lived with the Native Americans. He said these guys were living to be 110, 120 years old, and they were up and active and around, all these sorts of things. They never lost their mental capacity, and physically they were perfectly able to live a normal life. Obviously, they weren't as healthy and robust or as strong and robust as they were before, but they were extremely healthy and extremely able to have active, healthy lives, and their brains worked is the most important thing. And he found, this is long before processed foods, is in the 1800s. He found that people who were just eating more plants and grains were getting diseases. Other people simply weren't. And that you could cure those things like rheumatoid arthritis, like Crohn's disease, like chronic Lyme disease, like gout, like tuberculosis. You could cure these people by putting them on a pure red meat and water diet. 100 years before any effective medications for any of these things, he was curing people. And he wrote a book called The Relation of Alimentation and Disease. Alimentation is your digestion. So the relationship between the things we eat and the diseases we get, which is exactly what I'm talking about. The things that you're eating are causing these diseases. And the simple solution is to not eat it anymore. They go away. And I get dozens of messages from people every day. I have hundreds of patients that I see that just completely are reversing all of these diseases. Like, no, that can't happen. All of a sudden it did happen. Their doctors go, how the hell did that happen? Some of them are smart enough to go, okay, I want to know how you did that. I want to know what's going on. I want to know more about this. And others are just like, it's a fluke, whatever. I'm not going to pay too much attention to it. Those are idiots. Those are people that just don't want to pay attention to the world around them. And that's sad, but that's a lot of people. But there are more and more and more, people like yourselves that are interested in this, but also doctors that are like, how I want to help my patients. I don't just want to just be slinging drugs at them all the time. You're taking people off medications. They're getting away from these horrible biologics that are just causing massive, massive issues, causing cancers, causing infections, causing all sorts of different problems for these autoimmune issues. You just change their diet, they come off all these medications. I want to know more. So there's a lot of people doing that now too, which is great. But the most important thing is educating people and getting this information out there so people can just say, you know what, I'm going to take control of my own life. and I'll use the medical establishment when I need to, which is how it's supposed to be. You have an accident, you have a pregnancy, childbirth, all these sorts of things that it's good to have some help with. But 90% of what we treat now are these chronic diseases that we're just treating, for 4 or 5 decades until people die, horrible deaths, usually of Alzheimer's. That doesn't need to happen. That doesn't ever need to happen. You get medications that are causing Alzheimer's. You get lack of fat and cholesterol that can cause that, because your brain is made out of fat and cholesterol, and you're removing this, putting someone on a low fat, heart healthy diet, and their brains are decaying, right? Autism, there are different causes of autism. What it is a misdevelopment of the neurons. One of those is obviously going to be nutritional. There are tons of studies showing that women that eat more red meat preconception, lower rates of kids with autism. Higher saturated fat consumption during pregnancy, lower rates of autism. Higher LDL cholesterol during pregnancy, lower rates of autism. Women that breastfeed their kid instead of bottle feed, lower rates of autism. So there is definitely a connection there. And there's actually a paper that came out, a ketogenic diet, just removing carbohydrates as a treatment modality for autism. That's in the published literature, right? And then you have the fact that vegans and vegetarians have much higher rates of kids with autism. Why is that? Well, one of the reasons is your brain requires carnitine, this amino acid, to have proper functioning mitochondria, which is very important, becoming more and more understood that most of these chronic diseases are a product of damaged mitochondria. And so you need it for your mitochondria and your normal neuronal development. So if you don't have enough carnitine, your brain can't develop properly, and you'll get brain damage, basically misdevelopment. You'll get mental retardation and certain kinds of autism. Okay. So people say, well, you don't need carnitine. First of all, anyone who makes carnitine actually does better with more carnitine, and carnitine only comes from meat. You cannot get it from plants. Okay. Has to come from meat. But we call it a non-essential amino acid because we do make it. But actually only 70% of us make it, or make enough of it. 30% of people don't make any or don't make enough, and they have to get it from their diet. Before that was never an issue because everyone was eating meat. Everyone understood the importance of eating meat. So that didn't really come up. But now you have more vegans and vegetarians, and the rates of autism are going up. And now you're starting to see that 30% of the population that really does require carnitine, and are not getting enough of it in their diet, or they're eating a whole bunch of carbohydrates, and that's damaging how their brain works as well. It's very, very damaging to people with autism to eat carbohydrates at all. I had a person on my podcast, and her son, she said that he was a nonverbal autistic only when eating carbohydrates. And so they had him on a non-carbohydrate diet, basically a carnivore diet, and he was doing really, really well. And then go over to the grandparents' house, and grandparents were like, "Oh, that's stupid. We'll give him cookies and cake and buy his love, basically with drugs." That's what sugar is. It's a drug. It gives a dopamine response to the addiction centers of your brain, just like cocaine, heroin, and meth. It is a drug. And kid would come back and he wouldn't be able to speak for 3 days, right, until they were able to get this stuff away from him. And now, having been on a carnivore diet for a year, he's tested into the gifted programs at school after being a nonverbal autistic. Now he's in the gifted programs. So that right there, there's really nothing greater than that. We're destroying children's lives and futures, just by feeding them this processed crap and not giving them what their body and their brains need. So I'm sorry, it's sort of a long-winded explanation, but there's a lot there. And I obviously feel strongly about this, but this is one of the most important things that I think that we can do in our lives, is eat properly and get our kids to eat properly.
Oh, that's awesome. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Good. Just making sure the sound is still there. No, I appreciate it. Man, that was awesome. Did you guys learn some stuff?
I did.
I've listened to you for a couple of years, and some of the others, Saladino, of course, and a few others. And I heard some stuff today from you that I haven't heard before. So that was awesome.
Oh, good.
Really appreciate that. Do you have a couple minutes for Q&A?
Yeah.
Or are we?
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
Okay. And I don't know how you guys are doing on time, because we still have to grill some steak. So we're going to do that too. But do you guys have any questions for Dr. Chaffee? Yeah. Yeah, probably a bit closer to the computers.
Thanks so much for your time, Dr. Chaffee. I do have a question. I'm 49 years old. I've been on Carnivore for almost 4 years now. Had some blood work recently that, of course, shows high LDL. And my doctor is kind of pushing statins, of course. HDL is good. Obviously, triglycerides are low. I've been pouring through the literature, and I've heard before that, hey, you only have to worry about, small dense LDL versus the, larger LDL. One of them is bad. If this one's lower, you're okay. But I've been looking through the literature and not really finding anything that kind of convinces me that that's kind of, known or proven. In your mind, what are your thoughts on the LDL small dense versus high, and is it conclusive now that that's the case, or kind of we don't know just yet? I haven't seen a whole lot in the literature.
Well, what's convincing to me, and I did a lecture on this just called, the truth about cholesterol and heart disease. What's clear to me is that LDL was never a problem in the first place. It was a complete con. And so all of those studies that suggested that LDL was a problem or cholesterol was a problem at all were bought and paid for. That's published in the peer-reviewed literature. It's published in the peer-reviewed literature that the Framingham study was misrepresented, that the actual studies show that lower cholesterol equaled more heart attacks and strokes. There was a study with 11 million people, one of the largest studies ever done in the world, showing that people with higher LDL, any kind of LDL, small, dense, large, buoyant, whatever, there's over 100 different kinds of LDL in the first place, right? And so, just saying LDL means nothing, right? But in this study, doesn't matter what kind of LDL they had, people that had higher LDL cholesterol, lower all-cause mortality. What does that mean? They lived longer. You have more LDL, you live longer on average with 11 million people. So you have a study that said, oh, well, 200 people and this, that, and the other. Who gives a shit? 11 million trumps that, right? You live longer if you have more LDL cholesterol. And your small dense LDL, what is that? Where does that come from? That comes from eating sugar, eating carbs, drinking alcohol, and seed oils. You damage your large buoyant LDL, that damages and glycates them, oxidizes them, and they get damaged. You rip off your ApoB100. Your liver can't recognize them anymore. They don't function properly. So yeah, can those be used in an abnormal way? Sure. You know how you don't have those? Don't eat carbs, don't eat sugar, drink alcohol, don't have seed oils. There's some people that can still sort of get that anyway, but that's where that HDL to triglyceride ratio comes into, because it's sort of a specialized test to get your particulates looked at to see what kind of LDL you have. And so, but a good surrogate of that is if your triglycerides are low, it's very unlikely that you have the bad kind of LDL, right? And if you have maybe even not all that low triglycerides, but your HDL is high, very low likelihood that you have those SD-LDL, those pattern B type of LDL. And maybe those are a bit equivocal. You look at the ratio and it's like, okay, well, that actually is a good ratio. So that's what you look at. It's just a surrogate for doing a further test, looking at what kind of LDL you have. Now, the large buoyant LDL are not even associated. Any study that I know of, they're not really even associated with heart disease. And a lot of these studies are showing an inverse relationship. The lower your LDL cholesterol goes, the higher your heart attack, heart disease, stroke rate goes, right? That's what I see. And so, but either way, the large buoyant ones are healthy, that they are vital for your body. Statins lower those. Statins don't lower the SD-LDL. They don't lower all the damaged, glycated, oxidized, ones that can't be used properly by your body. They don't lower cholesterol. They stop your body from making cholesterol. Your body has to make cholesterol because every single cell in your body is cholesterol, right? The cell membranes just sacking around the cell is cholesterol. Your brain is 20% cholesterol. The axons are myelinated with cholesterol. Your bile is made out of cholesterol. All of your hormones are made out of cholesterol. Vitamin D is made out of cholesterol. Testosterone, estrogen, progestogens, cortisol, all of these things are made out of cholesterol. And what statins do is stop your body from making that cholesterol, which is used in every single part of your body and causes massive, massive, massive side effects. There's a book by a cardiologist in the UK called A Statin-Free Life, and he goes through a lot of the literature and data saying this is complete bullshit. You know, statins are the biggest moneymaker for the drug companies in history. And they want more and more people on it at a lower and lower age because you're on it for the rest of your life, right? You know, just like, oh, okay, go on this antibiotic for a week and you'll be fine. Go on this statin for a month and you'll be fine. No, you should go on this statin for the rest of your life. You just do that now, right? And you have all these side effects and problems and things like that. So, you know, and what does the literature say? If you have had a heart attack and you go on a statin, how long does this extend your life? Okay. 5 years, 5 months, 5 days. If you've been on it for more than 5 years, it will extend your life 5 days and probably give you Alzheimer's in the bargain, right? If you have not had a heart attack, on average, it'll extend your life 3 days. Okay. Again, probably with Alzheimer's. And so, you know, how is that a good trade-off? You know, there are very misleading statistics. Statistics in general are misleading. You know, this is why Mark Twain said there are 3 kinds of lies. There's lies, there are damn lies, and there are statistics, right? And so some of the statistics that like Lipitor put out, there was like a billboard ad, you know, for a while of like this lady just going, yeah, like that with a patient, the doctor saying like, oh. It's like, oh, Aubrey is so happy because she just reduced her her heart disease risk by 46%, blah, 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 blah. Where's that 46% come from? You know, that's not absolute risk. It's relative risk. So her risk was like less than 1% anyway. And that reduced that down by less than 0.4%. And so they said, oh, look at that, 46%. And I know it damn well isn't. You know, it's a fraction of a percent, right? So, you know, that's how these things are done misleadingly. And it's becoming more and more accepted, even in the people that still push statins, that statins do not reduce your risk of heart disease or stroke by 5 days by lowering cholesterol. That is not what's doing it. It's not the cholesterol lowering that is the benefit. They actually have a sort of an anti-inflammatory effect, sort of like aspirin. Heart attacks come from clots. Strokes come from clots. By and large, you can have a bleed, but you know, you have damage to the lining of your artery wall. That forms a clot. That forms scarring. That starts to thicken. You get atherosclerosis, and it's actually shown that some of these atherosclerotic plaques are actually from like trans fats. You know, we know that those are bad. You cook with cooking oil, with vegetable oil, they turn into trans fats. Like 30% can turn into about 30% trans fats. Okay. Plant sterols, which are like mimic the cholesterol that we would make normally, those get used as cholesterol all throughout your body, but they're not as good. It's like building a building with, you know, shitty concrete. It's like it just falls apart. So these things aren't as good. Your body doesn't like it, and your body just deposits it. It's like with the trans fats. Trans fats don't exist in nature anywhere. And so our body's just like, the hell is this? It's having some sort of, you know, properties that we can get behind, but you know, we don't know what this is. So they just stuff it places, and it's in our arteries for some damn reason. We don't know why. Same thing with plant sterols. So there was actually a study looking at aortic aneurysms and plaques in there, and actually found high deposition of these plant sterols, not our cholesterol, the plant cholesterols, because our bodies can't use it, right? So, you know, the idea that your cholesterol is a problem, first of all, is not borne out by the literature, you know, and you have, if you have all of these things based on the premise that the Framingham study was real, that the 7 Nations studies was real, that the USDA declaration saying that cholesterol caused heart disease, that all these things are real. Now it's all about just lowering cholesterol, because that's what it is now, you know. But then the studies in the last decade, they say like, okay, if you do lower cholesterol, what happens? Do you actually get less heart attacks? No, actually you get more heart attacks. You get more strokes. That was with randomized controlled trials in humans with tens of thousands of people. There are 3 different RCTs. Some of them were done at the time back in the 70s by Ansel Keys, the Minnesota coronary study. That was buried for decades because it showed the opposite of what he wanted it to, right? There's a couple of those. And, you know, one was uncovered just in the last 10 years by the guy's son, and he's a cardiologist, and he just found in his dad's papers, like in the basement, this massive study with tens of thousands of people, a randomized controlled trial where they gave them unsaturated fats and lowered their LDL cholesterol, and found that people started dropping off like crazy of heart attacks and strokes. And so they just buried it. They never published it. So his son published it 40 years later, not Ansel Keys, someone else. But, that's the level of corruption we're dealing with. So, if you see that, and so this is a false premise that cholesterol was never an issue, you just have to start over. You just have to throw that away, and you have to start over. And the studies subsequently are showing the exact opposite. You lower your cholesterol, you die way more often of heart attacks, strokes, or other things. It increases your all-cause mortality. So to me, I literally just don't test cholesterol unless someone just like really wants to check it. And I was like, okay, well, I'll show you. Your HDL is going to go up, your triglycerides are going to go down. I couldn't care less about your LDL unless it's too low. I want it up, right? And so, to me, cholesterol was never the issue, and statins certainly aren't the answer, because they don't lower the kind of cholesterol you want to get rid of anyway. SD-LDL, large borne LDL, do not increase your risk. In fact, they protect you from heart disease and cancer and infectious disease and all these sorts of things. Just LDL in general does. But just normal LDL, even in studies that still show maybe an increased correlation or something like that, it's very little. SD-LDL, but pattern B, is like a 70% increased risk association, right? So like 1.7 times increased risk of heart disease or strokes, cardiovascular disease, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. But metabolic syndrome is 600% increased risk. So a 6x increased risk. And diabetes is a 1000% increased risk, or 10x. Smoking is around the same. So, even the SDL, I'm just not getting out of bed for that. I'm going to address the metabolic disease. I'm going to address the diabetes. I'm going to address the smoking and the alcohol. Those are going to get more bang for your buck. And those are actually, very well established, being connected to heart disease. And the things that are going to cause metabolic syndrome and cause diabetes are also going to cause the SD-LDL. So you address the metabolic issue, and the rest of it takes care of itself.
Got it. Thank you for that. If I were to send some papers to my doctor, like, can you point me to like that 11 million person study? Is that like in JAMA, or is it somewhere else?
I'm gonna take a look. I've got it on my phone. I have that that one, the talk I do on my YouTube channel, just called the truth about cholesterol and heart disease, or heart disease and cholesterol. And that has a lot of links. It doesn't have all of them. I don't know if it has that one. It probably does though, but it has a lot of them.
If you wanted to, you could even email it to me, and I'll forward it to him for you if you don't see it right there.
Yeah. So it's called lack of association, it's in the BMJ, so the British Medical Journal. So it's one of the top journals. And the title is called Lack of an Association or an Inverse Association Between Low Density Lipoprotein Cholesterol and Mortality in the Elderly, a Systematic Review. So this goes through, systematic review of all the different literature and all that sort of stuff. And so people over the age of 60, the higher your LDL cholesterol, the longer you live, less likely you are to have Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, strokes, dementia, things like that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries.
We're debating whether it's Chaffee or Chaffee.
Chaffee, yeah.
So go ahead, and then you have.
Hey, Dr. Chaffee. Fantastic presentation. Very impressed with your knowledge and the way you present. I've done a lot of public speaking myself, and I'm very, very impressed. I had a super quick question. With this carnivore diet, which I've been hearing a lot about and studying, and I'm basically convinced that that's what I'm going to do from now. Your presentation was so effective and inspirational to me. But, when we talk about this carnivore diet, there's a lot of focus on red meat. What is your feeling about chicken, turkey, I know fish has a lot of bad rap right now because of, all the mercury and the pollution and the bioaccumulation and stuff. But when I hear about the carnivore diet, I don't hear a lot of people talking about chicken or turkey. Does chicken and turkey, poultry, I guess I should call it, does that have a place in the carnivore diet, or are you just kind of really advocating and focusing on more red meat?
Any meat's fine. So just any animal that you care to trap, kill, and eat should be fine. But it does matter what the animal ate itself. So the reason that ruminant animals are largely sought after in a carnivore diet is because of the rumen. They just have the more complicated digestive system that they can break down things that they aren't designed to eat either. Right. So they've even shown, like Roundup, the glyphosate, getting into all the crops and everything like that. And this, likely causing a lot of problems as well through, again, toxic exposure. That is something you get rid of, get away from when you stop eating plants. But then people say, well, the animals are being fed that, so they're actually concentrating it, just like, the fish going up the food chain would concentrate mercury, say, which is also not really proven or, it's sort of a theoretical, but the Japanese eat just a buttload of seafood, and they're not getting like mercury poisoning and all that sort of stuff. And, that we would expect to see if they were eating that amount. So I'm really doubtful that that's actually a thing. But what they're saying with the glyphosate, but it's actually not true that you don't get a huge concentration, but it can get through in the monogastrics, ones with like singular stomach, like a pig or chicken or even fish. So like farmed fish is a bad idea because they give them just wheat pellet. I mean, what fucking fish eats wheat? I mean, how stupid is that? And so, there's this farmed tilapia or whatever, it's just garbage. And so they don't have the omega-3s. They have tons of omega-6s. Omega-6s largely come from these seed oils and these plant oils and this linoleic acid and things like that. That's where that comes from. And so you feed that to the animals. They can't process it. You can't use omega-6s as energy, so they don't like burn it. It's fat, but it's not accessible. You always say, it's like, oh, it's a calorie. Well, that's stupid, because omega-6 is a fat, so it should have 9 calories per gram, kilocalories per gram. And yet it's not. You cannot use that for fuel. You cannot use that as energy. So that's dumb. These things are complex organic molecules that have complex chemical interactions in your body. Every single carbohydrate reacts differently in your body. Every single amino acid reacts differently in your body. Every single fatty acid reacts differently in your body. Right. Omega-6 and omega-3s are almost identical molecules. They just have a switch on where their bond is in one carbon group or another. It completely changes their chemical properties, right? Nearly identical in the atoms that they have and the calories that they have if you were to burn them. Completely different chemical interactions in your body. And so you can ignore that. Anyone who says calories in, calories out, just ignore everything they ever say after that for the rest of their life. It's not worth wasting your time and your mental energy. But the reason that the ruminants are so good is because they can actually get rid of these things. So if a cow's just eating grass, that's the best, right? Because it's going to be as healthy as it can be, and its meat is going to be healthier for you. So a regeneratively raised, grass-fed and finished cow has up to 4 to 5 times the amount of macronutrient or micronutrients, vitamins and minerals and things like that than like Safeway beef would have. But Safeway beef is still going to be better than anything else on earth, because they're still very, very nutritious, and they can filter out a lot of this crap. So there's a study that just came out recently actually saying that, like, hey, actually ruminant animals can actually get rid of glyphosate. So even if they're being fed Roundup covered grain, it doesnn't get into the meat.
So you're saying on that point, real quick, sorry to interrupt, but just on that point, if people are eating, if they can't, afford quote unquote, grass-fed ruminant meat, and they're just grabbing, Safeway meat, that's still a better option than the alternative of
basically any alternative. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I think of it sort of as the Olympics, right? So, person who got silver medal at the Olympics, right? Well, they lost to gold, right? But they also beat everyone else on earth, right? So it's not too bad. You get silver at the Olympics, you know, you're not going to get, you know, kicked out of your parents' house. You know, it's like, it's fine. You know, you'll get a gold star, you'll get a silver medal and a gold star on the fridge. Right. So it's fine. You know, the majority of what I eat is just Costco beef, you know, because that's what I have access to. It's actually a bit of a pain in the ass to actually get, like, you know, grass-fed and finished beef out here. It's way more expensive. It's super lean. It's already, in Australia, it's already hyper lean. They really took that to heart of the whole no fat sort of thing. So you get like a ribeye, quote unquote ribeye. They cut the fat cap off it and all the other things. So it's just like, it's a piece of sirloin and that you pay, you know, $20 a pound for. It's like, no, that's not what a ribeye is. And, you know, so the grass finished stuff is like even more lean and even more trimmed and even more expensive. So it's just sort of a waste of time. But in America, what I did is I just found there's different websites that you can find ranchers that only do grass-fed throughout the entire life of the cow. And then you just get that. And I would just buy a whole cow, and you buy an older cow. That's going to actually have a higher concentration of nutrients. It's actually even better for you. And it tastes that way. It has a much stronger beef flavor. Now, some people say, oh, that's a very strong taste. I thought it was amazing. I didn't think it was too strong at all. And like in Italy, like in Tuscany and things like that, they eat cows that are between 10 and 15 years old. You know, they look at the rest of the West and be like, you guys are eating veal. You know, you're just losing all the flavor. And people think, well, it gets too tough after that. No, it doesn't. You know, the connective tissue, like the gristle and the tendons and things like that, that turns into like whale bone. I don't know how that stuff gets so like rock hard, but it's also easy just to get it out. You're not chewing on gristle all day, just taking out this chunk of extra bone almost, and then just eating the fat and the meat. So the meat and the fat are nice and soft. It's the gristle that's harder. You just take it out. It's easier to avoid, actually, but the flavor is absolutely next level, and it's cheaper as well. So if you buy an older cow, so I went to a rancher, and you just call directly. If you go through a butcher, they'll double whatever they're doing. So he'll mark it up 100% just by doing the legwork for you. It's real easy. You call the ranch, say, this is what I'm looking for. You can buy a young steer if you want. I went for the older cow. I said, what's the oldest cow that you have? And they said, well, we're actually going to call a 10-year-old cow from the herd. Normally we just grind it up into hamburger because there's no market for it. And so, I was just like, well, I'd like that. I'd like that cut up into steaks. You have to tell them to keep the fat on. So don't trim any fat. I want all the fat, any fat that you trim, I want that in a bag. Because there's less marbling. There's really no marbling in the grass-fed cow. But there's actually quite a lot of subcutaneous fat. There's still plenty of fat. It's subcutaneous. So it's just on the surface. And around the organs, as opposed to in the muscle itself. So you want to get as much as you can. And it was cheaper, because he, was basically making almost nothing off the older cows because it just went into hamburger and that wasn't very valuable. And so he was making more money and I was getting it cheaper as well. So I think it was like $2 a pound, something like that. For an entire cow. Is the best meat I've ever had in my entire life. And like I ate this stuff and I just felt like supercharged for the rest of the day. And so that's something you can do in America. Can't do it here. So I've just been eating Costco beef and perfectly fine.
Awesome. All right. One more question, I think, here.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I just had a question about, so when I eat meat, then I need some kind of fiber to go along with it. What do you recommend?
No, you actually don't want fiber. So, why does fiber go out? Why do they say, oh, you want that to bulk up your stools? Well, why is it bulking up your stools? Because you can't actually absorb it. You can't break it down. You can't digest it. So it is by design something we are not supposed to eat. Millions of years ago, we could do it because our appendix wasn't the size of your pinky. It was 4 feet long. It was called the cecum. And that's where fiber would pack into and break down. We cultivate certain bacteria in that part of our gut that would actually eat the fiber. So it's actually no vertebrate animal can break down fiber. So even herbivores, they cannot break down fiber. It's the bacteria in their gut that eats the fiber. And as a byproduct of eating the fiber, they actually produce short chain fatty acids, which are actually 100% saturated. So even cows and gorillas that are just eating, grass and green leaves, they're getting about 70% of their calories from saturated fat because they eat the fiber, but they absorb fat and protein because the bacteria are producing fat from eating the fiber. And they also, bacteria die off and they absorb that as protein. So, they're eating grass and leaves, but what they're absorbing is fat and protein. So that's what you need as well. You need fat and protein. All animals need fat and protein. And we can't get that from plant material. We can't get that from fiber. You do not need fiber. I have a video that just is called "You Don't Need Fiber." And so you can watch that. The studies that suggest that eating more fiber is good. Again, these are all coming from the Seventh-day Adventists. They're all coming from, the food and drug companies and things like that, and people that have, serious agendas. But you have to just sort of have some common sense when you're reading these things. You never read the conclusion. You read the study and make your own conclusion, right? And so what they did is they didn't compare like for like. They said when people eat more fiber, they have different improvements in their health or something like that. Okay, what does that mean, right? Most people in America if they're not eating a lot of fiber, it's because they're eating a highly processed, ultra processed diet, because you can't put fiber in ultra processed foods. That's why, the bun at McDonald's will never have fiber in it, because they have to freeze it and ship it and do all that sort of stuff. Fiber doesn't freeze well. It messes up the texture. And so, you really can't do that. So if you're not eating a lot of fiber, well, I'm not eating any fiber, right? But that's not who is the majority of people not eating fiber. It's the people that are eating ultra processed foods. So you go from eating ultra processed foods, doesn't really have much fiber. Then you start eating more fiber. What does that mean? You're eating more whole foods, right? So you're getting away from eating processed foods and you get this benefit. It's not even that big of a benefit, but it's a benefit, right? But it's always compared to what? So any economist, you say something and they'll say, okay, compared to what? Compared to what? Compared to what? You need to ask that as well. We need fiber. Fiber, these studies show that, people do better with fiber. Compared to what? Compared to people eating processed food diet. So is it the fiber improving their health, or is it getting away from processed food? It's getting away from processed food, because there are studies that are actually interventional in nature that actually show that and there's a smaller study, but it's really the only one that exists. It was like 75 people or something like that, all symptomatic, all had sort of like, digestive issues, discomfort, and all these sorts of things. And they were eating a certain amount of fiber. And so they had split up into 4 groups. One group just kept eating the same amount of fiber. Another group increased the amount of fiber. One group reduced the amount of fiber. One group eliminated fiber. And when it shuffled into the exact opposite of what they would say it would, right? So people that ate the same stayed the same. People who ate more fiber got worse. People who ate less fiber got better. People who eliminated fiber, complete resolution of all their symptoms. Okay. There's a study with over 2,000 people, so a bigger study, doing colonoscopy. So, camera looking up the rectum into the colon, and looking for diverticulosis, which is colon disease, right? And so this is very serious. You can get this infected, diverticulitis, you can die. And as we get older, the risk of this goes up, basically because we're exposing ourselves to something that's breaking it down and damaging it, right? So like, what is that thing? Previously was thought to be from constipation. In fact, most people will tell you, oh, that's from constipation. You're getting constipated, it's all blocked up. It's really hard pushing things through. That's actually not true. Constipation was not even associated with the development of diverticulosis, not even associated, right? So if you have an association, right, you have something, it's increased 70% or 17% association or something like that. That does not prove causation. You cannot prove causation from association, right? Because there's an association between ice cream sales and drownings, right? Okay, so that means that, maybe someone's getting cramps or blah, 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 and shark attacks as well. So, okay, what the hell's happening, right? Well, maybe it's an association because when the temperature rises, it gets hot, people buy more ice cream, they go swimming more, they drown more, they get attacked by sharks more, right? So it's the heat that is the commonality between all those, not that ice cream fed children taste better to sharks, maybe they do, I don't know, but but that's what an association. But if you have a lack of association, so you can never prove causation from association, but if you have a lack of association, that proves there is no causation, right? Because you can't have causation if there's not even an association, right? And so there's no association between constipation and diverticulosis, according to that study with 2,000 people. So it's a pretty good study. Meat was not associated. Fat was not associated. Constipation was not associated. What was associated? More fiber was associated, strongly associated, like a 600% increased risk. More fiber you ate, more likely you were to get diverticulosis. More bowel motions you had a week, more than 15 bowel motions a week. Again, 700% or so increased risk of developing diverticulosis, right? So you eat a whole bunch of fiber, you can't digest it. Your body has to get rid of it. It's in the name, it's waste, it's wasteful. You didn't need it in the first place, right? So your body has to get rid of it. And so you're going to have to go to the bathroom more and more and more because you just have a whole bunch of crap in your body, right? And so it has to go out, right? Where you don't eat that fiber, you absorb 98, 99% of the meat that you eat. You barely go at all, right? And that's by design. You won't be constipated. Constipation is not about frequency. It's not about how often you go. It's about the consistency, right? So there's a thing called the Bristol stool chart where you see like the different types of things. Basically want this thing to be sort of soft and mushy sort of thing. But if it gets dry, hard, craggly, and cramped, that's because you're not eating enough fat. Fat actually is what keeps your bowels moving and your digestion going and keeping that stool soft, because your body has a limited capacity to absorb fat. So there's no such thing as overeating fat. You say, okay, well, fat's not that bad, but you don't want to eat too much. There's no such thing. You cannot eat too much. It's not physiologically possible, right? Well, I mean, it is. It's really hard to do, but you really can't absorb fat without bile. So our livers make a limited amount of bile. I think that's because it wants that amount of fat back in return. So it's making your body doesn't just do things randomly. It's not going to just make bile, which is an expensive, energy dependent process. If it's just just for the hell of it, right? No, it wants a return on its investment. That's why you have 4 organs all working in concert just to absorb fat. Liver's making bile, gallbladder's storing it, pancreas is making enzymes to break it down. In fact, 5 stomachs sort of starts the breakdown process, and the small intestine absorbs it, right? So you have 5 organs all working together just to absorb fat. That's how important fat is. But without bile, you don't absorb fat. After bile runs out, there's really only like 10-15% of fat that you can absorb. All the rest of it goes out, right? It's usually like medium chain fatty acids. It won't even absorb all of them. So that spillover is what keeps your stool soft. And so, if you're just going once a week, that's not constipation as long as it's soft. But if it's dry and hard, that's constipation. And that's just because you're not eating enough fat. So you have to eat enough fat. You want to sort of shoot for about gram for gram of fat to gram of protein, right? And then people can adjust from there, but that's generally that's about 70% calories from fat. Calories, again, are useless, but in putting it in metrics that we understand, gram for gram is about 70% calories from fat. People tend to need around that, but depending on if you're getting constipated, you need to increase the fat. Right. If you get diarrhea, then maybe you don't need to eat as much fat because you're not absorbing a lot more fat than your body can use. Now, if you're still drinking coffee, that's a laxative. You drink tea, that's a laxative. You're using artificial sweeteners like erythritol, stevia, xylitol, those sorts of horrible things. They're, first of all, poison, but they're also laxatives. Okay. And when you get rid of fiber, now you don't have this like traffic jam that you're trying to sort of push through, a bottleneck. Now it's just sort of open lanes and you're just flooding this stuff down. So you're going to have a much more dramatic effect. So if you're drinking coffee, drinking tea, using artificial sweeteners, don't be surprised if you get diarrhea. Okay. If you're not doing any of those things, but you're still getting diarrhea, well, that might be that you're, eating more fat than your body can absorb, a lot more fat than your body can absorb. The other side of it is that if you're eating so little fat that you're actually getting very constipated, you get sort of like a pseudo obstruction. The solids aren't really going to come out very well. So the liquid's going to pour around it. And then you'll have liquid diarrhea. And that's called overflow diarrhea or spurious diarrhea. And that shows where like most of the time you have like really watery stools, but every now and then you have a really dry, hard, painful, difficult to pass constipated stool. And then you go back to the liquid stool. So that's because you're eating so little fat that your body's getting extremely constipated. So you need to eat a lot more fat after that.